I want to talk to you about suffering. When someone suffers enough, be it chronic pain after being hit by a car and breaking dozens of bones, be it crippling, inexorable depression, or be it endless fatigue and nausea from chemotherapy, what can happen in the world of that person is that their world can warp around their pain. Now, this can create a will to conquer disease and seek treatment, but it can also undermine the will to live and any desire for longevity. So when someone rejects the idea of longevity, what are they really saying? They are rejecting the idea of protracted suffering. And for those who face mental illness, they can wind up rejecting the very idea that life itself can be anything but suffering. With this said, our longevity research is beginning to show that we are approaching a longevity escape velocity. It is not unreasonable to hope that in the coming years we will have the resources and capability to arrest aging and avert chronic illness. With that said, COVID has also demonstrated that the norms and cultural milieu of our healthcare consciousness is still very poor. The two simple prophylactics of avoiding obesity and accepting vaccination have been rejected by wide swaths of the US population. Trust in medical science has been eroded by an ever-degenerating partisan culture war. And for the first time in recent history, life expectancy has actually trended down. To the extent that our current medicine can actually slow aging and avert chronic illness, we know that it takes personalization, dozens of specialists, health literacy on the part of the patient, and it takes millions of dollars. Recognize that guy? It also takes the active and skeptical pursuit of competent care. There's this meta-study from 2019 that shows that up to 37% of doctors' second opinions disagree with the first opinion. This means that many diagnoses and treatment are simply wrong. And the only way to avoid them, to avoid the trap of them, is to seek multiple opinions from different doctors. Now, while large swaths of US population seem to reject the narrative that COVID was a legitimate epidemic and believe that we have had a malpractice conspiracy on a vast scale, a real malpractice conspiracy has occurred. Hundreds of thousands of US citizens have died from the overprescription of opioids, an epidemic rooted in raw corruption from criminal pharmaceutical companies like Purdue and Insys. Malpractice can be considered, back a slide, malpractice can be considered the third leading cause of death in the US. And that doesn't even include these overdose deaths. So not only must we tirelessly engage with the medical system, we must also tirelessly defend ourselves from the medical system to avoid incompetence and corruption. Now, this is a tall order. This is a job. Healthcare is a jungle, and without exceptional privilege, we are desperately vulnerable. Here, in the richest country in the world, we can't even eliminate smoking. We can't get the average BMI below 25. People don't want to test. They avoid going to the doctor for years, and they only begin to act when they begin to suffer. And so when doctors tell me that they're afraid that AI is going to take their jobs, I can't help but often chuckle. Because to do what we need to do here, to start a longevity revolution and defeat the inevitability of suffering today, it would take 1 billion doctors. So yes, our science is rapidly maturing, but our healthcare institutions remain shamefully underdeveloped, shamefully flawed. This dichotomy exposes a missing link between individual and institution. a missing layer of triage and advocacy. And I believe that our only recourse is a silicon solution to create an artificial advocate for everyone that can administer a global triage. This advocate needs to know everything you eat, needs to know how much you sleep, how much you exercise, needs to know every pain in your body and every biomarker. Like a devoted parent, it needs to be able to communicate with your doctor and with you. It needs to be able to guide you, to motivate you, and to protect you from doctors who won't listen to you. It has to work with your doctors to build you a personalized protocol and then keep you to it. So when you sit on the exam room table in a doctor's office, what I'm saying is, I want you to be able to take out your phone and put it next to you on that wax paper. And I want your phone to be able to literally talk to your doctor and coordinate care on your behalf. To be your perfect memory for all your symptoms, all your treatment, your entire medical history. What it will need to do is communicate with your doctor so that they can truly understand what you face qualitatively and provide you with the best possible quality of care. Now, this is a tall order too. How the hell do we do all this? Well, first, I want to make sure that you understand how we got here, because there's a lot of talk around AI. And the revolution is real, but with it has come a tsunami of bullshit. In 2010, a top-of-the-line GPU only had around 2% the power of our top-rated chips today. Now, if you were a machine learning researcher back then, what you would have to do is build an elaborate scaffolding around your neural network. Otherwise, it would run out of resources. Not only that, but you would have to pour in tens of thousands of data points just to get a baseline of performance that still was nowhere near a human. And worst of all, there was a ceiling of performance. If you put 1 million data points in, it would perform little better than 100,000. Now, come 2017, researchers asked themselves, let's strip away this scaffolding around our models. Now we have 10 times more compute on every chip. And what this reveals is that, yes, now if you strip away that scaffolding, you could put in 1 million data points and get much better performance than 100,000. Now, this immediately brings up the next question. How do you get as much data into these models as humanly possible? Well, the solution wasn't more hand-built, human-labeled data sets. It was self-supervised learning. You could take a text or an image and obscure part of it, and then have your model try to guess what was behind the mask. You do this enough over millions of iterations and billions of data points, and you could get your model to learn fundamental truths about how the world works. And this worked great, especially for classification tasks, cats versus dogs. But when researchers decided to try to have these same models produce verbose, coherent text, it wasn't enough. So then OpenAI asked a question, kind of a silly question. What happens if we make the models 100 times bigger? Not 100 times more data, because we already did that, but 100 times more neurons, 100 times less efficient. And the result was GPT-3. Now, I was lucky enough to be one of the first beta testers of GPT-3. And what we discovered collectively in that beta was that if you make these models big enough, suddenly you gain this emergent phenomenon in which you no longer have to pour training data in the conventional way, take it from a work mode to a training mode. You could feed data in with the work, and it would learn in context. Now, OpenAI took all this data that we built, and they turned it into a special data set, which they developed a new technique called instruction tuning. And from this, they built InstructGPT. And this was the first language model that could reliably output coherent analytical text. And when I entered this beta, there were only 200 people. By the time it ended, there were 80,000. In 2010, if you wanted to do a basic classification task, you needed something like 30,000 data points. By 2017, 2,000. By 2021, on the right tasks, you only needed 5. So OpenAI knew that they were onto something. And so a small team within the company came up with a hypothesis. Let's take InstructGPT and wrap it in a chat app and release it to the internet for free. And as we all know, it was a spectacular success. And they believed that this chat modality was going to make it easier for non-technical people to relate to these models. And it worked. But their success was really an accident. They had to divert so many GPUs to ChatGPT that paying customer lost service for days. And I have many friends in the company, and they told me this very frankly. So there was no master plan. OpenAI wanted to scale their instruction tuning data set, and what they got was a hyper-viral consumer app. Now, why am I talking about ChatGPT? Haven't we talked about ChatGPT enough? Well, that's the problem. When somebody puts up an example from ChatGPT and says, this is the state of the art of AI right now, they're misleading you. They're selling you a straw man. And that's because what they're doing is showing you a single inference. In human terms, an inference is only like 3 seconds of thinking, a single chain of thought. Now, if we take 15 minutes and turn it around and give it to somebody like me to build what we call a pipeline, that can be hundreds of inferences. So let me ask you this. Would you judge your doctor on 3 seconds? No. You'd give them 10 to 15 minutes, just like they would give you. And so this is a pipeline. We can chain together a series of different models performing different tasks with different data. And the result will be a more sophisticated output. So if someone is talking to you about AI and they don't use this term pipeline, or they don't describe the concept to you, I want you to be skeptical. So, to build this advocate, we need to identify the right tasks and chain them together in the right models with the right data. The most fundamental skill that we want to give this machine learning pipeline is the ability to interview users and put them into a state of interoception. If introspection is the mind thinking about the mind, interoception is the mind thinking about the body. And from this arcane word, I take the name of my company, Intero. So patients relate to their health on a fundamentally qualitative level, how we feel. And from how we feel, we develop a mental model of our health. And this is a brew of pain, body image, perceived physical performance, and mood. And from this mental model come all our lifestyle decisions and how we pursue medical care. It's all the direct output of this really feeble, weak, vulnerable mental model. But thus far, there's been no operating system in which to rationalize this mental model. Every day, hundreds of data points of perception flow through our bodies and go tragically unrecorded and unmeasured. What few details do make it into this weak, persistent mental model are at the mercy of ignorance, forgetfulness, and cognitive bias. So when you sit in the exam room and your doctor asks you what's wrong, it is this dangerously feeble mental model that is being tested. Pain, eating habits, discoloration, sexual dysfunction, sensory disturbance, cognition. All these are essentially subjective dimensions of your health that when you're sitting alone in your home, the only way to access them is through self-reflection, through interoception. Because there is not yet a wearable that can read your mind. Would we want one? So, by building a machine learning pipeline that can build into you a habit of self-examination through probing questions. All this rich, qualitative data can finally be captured and measured. Your phone is going to build you a Bible of your health, an externalized mental model. It's going to track everything you eat and how well it fits your dietary needs. It's going to track your exercise and your sleep by working with your wearables. But it is going to do more than any wearable can do alone, because it's actually going to understand how your workout felt, how you actually felt when you woke up. It's going to know more than just your heart rate and simple biometrics. By interviewing you every day, it is going to be able to model your mental health. And by tracking pain and abnormalities, every day it's going to be able to write you a report about your health. You're going to be able to walk this report into your doctor's office. Now, what I've described is just the first tier of a tech tree. It's not truly yet an advocate. To be an advocate, it has to do far more. Now, this first layer, though, is not theoretical, as you can see. We're already building it. And I want to share with you 2 examples of alpha testers within our testing group who have already begun to apply this technology in their life. So take a 68-year-old male. For the last 40 years, his doctors have believed that his chest pain, which occurs in the center of his chest, is just psychosomatic, because he has an anxiety disorder and he has asthma. Just 8 weeks using Intero, he is able to collect enough hard data to prove to his doctors that his symptoms of chest pain do not correlate with his asthma or his anxiety. And he's finally able to convince his doctors that this is a physiological problem. He's able to get more testing and prove that it is inflammation of the cartilage around his sternum, a purely physiological problem. Second example, 29-year-old male, suffers from severe nasal congestion for years. The doctors keep telling him, oh, it's just allergies, it's just allergies. But with Intero, he is able, through the interview process, to collect data that proves that his congestion is completely asymmetrical. It only occurs in one nostril. This is able to convince his doctors to give him new testing, to put a probe up his nose and prove that he has a severely deviated septum. The airflow through his nose is restricted 80%. That disrupts his sleep, and it actually requires surgery. Okay, so from here, how do we climb the tech tree? How do we get to an actual advocate? Well, the next step is to build a second pipeline. If our first pipeline thinks slowly, writes analysis, and asks questions, our second pipeline has to think faster. It has to be able to imitate a human in the room with their doctor. To train this, we are going to have hundreds of doctors do thousands of mock conversations with the ML pipeline, something that we're already starting. But that's only one part of the story, because we're also going to be able to train on data from our users and create anonymized care narratives, essentially digital doppelgangers. Let's take a real example. 32-year-old woman from New York is having trouble getting MRI to prove that she has sciatica. She has this terrible pain that goes up the back of her leg and into her back. We're going to be able to find a digital doppelganger, something like a 31-year-old woman, similar background, similar living situation. We're going to be able to show how she managed to successfully navigate the medical system. We're going to show an algorithm of care. And we're going to be able to give Lexi the ability to go into her doctor's office and use this as a means of persuasion. But more importantly, the algorithm of care will be a map. We're going to know how the digital doppelganger successfully got her diagnosis, what insurance she used, what doctor she went to, how much she paid out of pocket. And this is going to give Lexi, it's going to arm her with the ability to make hard decisions that her doctors are not necessarily going to help her with. So we are mice dropped into a maze that is the medical system. And for us to increase our chances of making it out successfully, We need to be able to distribute a collective intelligence globally. And this includes protocols of diet and supplementation. We know that heart disease remains the biggest killer in the US. And if you've read Peter Attia's book, Outlive, you'll know that he has this protocol of recommending you get prescribed prophylactic statins. Now, this is a pretty bold suggestion, but the idea is you get this prescription, you optimize your cholesterol down to really low levels. Now, I really respect Attia, and I love his book, but I think that this protocol is a little unrealistic because getting prescribed prophylactic statins when you don't match the clinical template is hard. And I know this from my own personal experience. Last year, my LDL cholesterol was slightly elevated at 126. So I went to my doctor and I asked him, are statins appropriate for me? And he knows my background. My father has diabetes and is on statins and metformin, so I have a predisposition to this. So I asked him, are statins appropriate? And my doctor laughs in my face. He tells me, eat fewer eggs. So I push back on that. But he insists. He says the only way for a youngish, nominally healthy man to optimize his cholesterol is diet. So I humor him. I've never had a problem with a strict diet. So I take my strict diet and I make it more strict. And the result is only a 4-point decrease in my cholesterol levels. So I go back to my doctor and I ask him, what about berberine? And his response is, what's berberine? So at that point, I know that I need to get a second opinion. So I get a second opinion and I get on berberine. Berberine is a cheap plant-based supplement that studies show if taken at 500 milligrams 3 times a day with food, and I think with food is important, it can decrease your LDL cholesterol by 30%. Now, I'm really lucky. I am an outlier. Within just a couple months, I already saw a 35% decrease in my LDL cholesterol. I wasn't satisfied with this. I decided to titrate up to 3,000 milligrams, and it went down to 47% reduction from baseline. My A1C at 1,500 went down from 5.4 to 5.1, at 3,000 milligrams all the way to 4.5. These are huge numbers. These numbers are equivalent to what my father gets with high-dose statins and metformin. These are protocols that we can democratize. By putting an AI advocate in the hands of 1 billion people, we can rapidly spread out these protocols and test them, and then distribute them, digital doppelganger to digital doppelganger. So this concept of global triage is about deputizing ourselves into the medical system to wring out all the low-hanging fruit of disease prevention. Now, I know you don't trust AI, and I understand. It's going to be used to steal your money and steal your elections. But I think it's worth it. I really consider myself a zealot. I have had a lot of tragedy in my family. I've seen suffering and death up close. And the result is that it has made me believe that the highest currency of human virtue is the relief of suffering. And so, be it AI drug discovery, or be it genetic modeling, or indeed qualitative health tracking, I believe this stuff can save a lot of lives. Thank you. Do we have time for questions? If anyone has questions? Okay. Yep. Anything about AI? Hopefully you got a little bit of the backstory of ChatGPT. Go ahead.
About treating the symptoms rather than the cause. We have high LDL.
Yes.
It can come from various reasons. Maybe the way that you live. So this is still in some way, method to treat the symptoms rather than look at the cause. Where does that interject?
Well, just speaking for myself, this berberine protocol had just an unbelievably dramatic effect compared to diet. So I would disagree. I think a lot of current science suggests that really diet is not a good way to treat your cholesterol. And cholesterol as a precursor to plaque is important. If you can reduce your cholesterol, you can limit your risk factors for heart disease. And The reason that I'm so excited by berberine is that it is so cheap and so powerful that it really defines this idea of triage, right? Imagine if we got millions and millions of people on berberine. I believe we could see millions of lives saved. And the idea is that, okay, an AI-driven app, I am not yet comfortable having it prescribe prescription drugs. I can't do that. That's a huge can of worms. But we can prescribe these simple supplements. And when they work, like berberine, for people with the right profile, I think they can be transformative. Now, again, it may not work for everybody. I believe I'm an outlier. If you look at these studies, there's a great meta-study that really proves that berberine has this effect. I'm obviously an outlier. I'm at 47%. And there's nothing in the literature that I can see to back that up. So there are people out there like me, right? And for people like me, it would be a no-brainer to go on this supplement. Does that answer your question? Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, I believe through genetic research, through getting genetic testing, somebody like me can probably reveal that it's a predisposition. And for me to have elevated cholesterol in my late 20s and early 30s on a very good diet indicates that there is a predisposition. And it's clear in my family. And yes, if you go and get genetic testing, you can read it into this system. And we can begin to incorporate it into your reports. Go ahead.
Are you looking at any other markers like lipoprotein A or ApoB, or just looking at solely LDL? Studies also show that just elevated LDL itself is not always an end-all be-all for negative cardiovascular outcomes. So were there any other markers that went into this aside from just the LDL itself?
LDL is where I had the biggest effects. And I had to work with my doctor, right? And I had to get the right... Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you why it's a bad thing for my health. It's because I saw my father's story. You know, he was prescribed statins, and he's on metformin, and I've seen his evolution of his illness, and I want to avert that. So for me, that was the big picture. So the straight answer is that I don't have that extra data for you. I did focus on my LDL because that was my father's story. Not at all. Not at all. And his going further back in, on his side of the family, we see it, that same thing. Any other questions? Go ahead. Sure. Yes. Mm-hmm. No, I didn't answer it because some of this is a little proprietary. But we have a 500,000 data point synthetic data set that we acquired through building this massive data scraping pipeline that took about two years to build. And so we have this pretty deep moat. And yes, I talk about few-shot learning and in-context learning, but that's not what Intero is based on. It's based on a really deep, fine-tuned pipeline. Does that answer your question? Anybody else? Okay.
Great. Sebastian Barbera, everybody.